Today's episode is a bit shorter for personal medical reasons. I'm fine, don't worry. But today's stories include werewolves at the window, shadowy silhouettes, and creepy camping critters. Enjoy these tales and be sure to send me your stories at darkstories.org. We're currently trying to put together an episode featuring stories with drawings or photographs of the creature or entity the story is about. Also, you can subscribe to all my podcasts at eeriecast.com. Now, let's begin. The Creature That Roams Blanton National Park, from Wesley C. This happened in the largest national park in Kentucky, Blanton National Forest and Nature Preserve. Blanton is both the biggest forest in Kentucky and possibly the most beautiful. I finished showing the park ranger my park admission slip and drove through the gate. I looked out into the parking lot and noticed there was hardly anyone there. I figured this might be normal because it was 7 in the morning after all, and on a business day. When I got out, I released the ratchet ties holding down my red beat-around ATV. After setting it down, I loaded everything on top and locked my truck. It only took about 5 minutes to drive to my spot, and another 45 minutes to set up my tent, butane stove, and unpack my food. I took my handgun out of my portable safe that I brought along and decided to take a hike through the massive forest. I'd made it about a mile from my campsite before I realized it was already getting dark, so I needed to head back. About a minute later, I heard a stick break. My first thought was that it was a park ranger. I turned around, ready to show him my admission slip. To my surprise, there was no one there. I looked around and saw no animals or people, and the closest campsite was about 200 yards away. Okay then, I muttered to myself, thinking maybe a squirrel or possum dropped a hickory nut or something. After not seeing anything, I just continued walking back to the site. A louder cracking sound made me freeze in my tracks. To be honest, I wasn't surprised when I didn't see anything once more, but I was unsettled. What the heck? I said aloud into the trees, assuming that this was some sort of prank. When I heard no reply, I began to jog back to my campsite. I just need some sleep, I told myself as I approached my tent. But not before some food. While I was moving the cooler out to the campfire, I heard another slight sound about 15 yards away. I thought nothing of it at first, as it was almost inaudible. But this was different. I began feeling something observing me, and there was a horrible rotting stench that filled the air. I tried to cover my nose, but to no avail. I looked around but still saw nothing, and the smell still would not go away. I began to draw my pistol, thanking God that I had it with me. I also started to feel nauseous. I tried taking deep breaths, but the fresh air that I was expecting was replaced by this awful rotting smell. I was beginning to get a headache and I threw up due to the nausea. "What the heck is that?" I yelled. The nausea started to get worse. It felt like my stomach was writhing like some sort of worm. I thought I was going to throw up again. It was then that I looked up towards a crunching noise in the tree line. The sound began moving to my left and I froze in my tracks. Standing there, about 2 feet to my left, was a creature that I had never seen before. I'll try to describe its features as best I can. The creature's body was a lumpy roll of flesh that was covered with bulging blisters and scars. Its legs were positioned backwards with its knees pointing up, and they were so skinny, they looked like they would snap with excessive force. But its face was possibly the most horrifying. It had glossy, pure black eyes. The creature's nose was 2 holes where a human nose should have been, and it had teeth that were 2 inches long. They were bloody and almost needle-like. I began feeling sick again. That thing smelled awful. I tried to run, but my feet were frozen in place. I tried to scream, but all that made it out was a dry breath. That creature must have heard my weak yelp, because it began to walk towards me. Right away, I went into fight or flight mode, and I chose to fight. I drew my little .22 and fired 3 shots into its head. The creature turned in pain and let out a deafening scream, but it sounded inhuman, sort of like 5 animals screaming at once. Then I ran. I knew that I only had a limited time before that thing came for me. I pumped my legs as fast as they would go and ran to my tent, grabbing my phone. I ran to my ATV that was parked nearby. I pushed the little 150cc engine as fast as it could go and drove to my truck. I started my engine and drove the heck out of there. I've gone on multiple camping trips since then and haven't seen that thing or any other creature like that again, and I hope to never see it again. I advise you all, if you ever go camping in Blanton National Forest, beware of the creature that roams there. Also, let me know if you ever see anything like it. Camp safely. Werewolf in Oklahoma, from Anthony R. This happened a year ago when I was 14 in a part of the woods of Oklahoma. I was on a trip with my parents, my 2 sisters, my 2 aunts, my uncle, and 4 cousins. We rented a cabin so we could stay for a week. When we got there, we unpacked all our things and got everything inside. After that, I went out to check out the woods surrounding the cabin. There was nothing but trees for miles, as far as the eye could see. Well, I did spot a lone deer grazing, which was nice. Everything seemed normal. We went out to go pick up some food at the nearest restaurant later. When we got back, we found these huge paw prints, unlike anything I'd ever seen in my life. Back home, we had 3 dogs, 2 small ones and a big one. I've measured my big dog's paw prints before, and they're about as big as my hand. But this was much bigger. I asked my father what kind of wild dogs left these paw prints. He said maybe they belonged to a coyote, or worst case scenario, a wolf. It didn't stay on our minds long, as after that we watched a movie while eating some dinner. After that it was getting dark and we went to bed. I was sleeping in the living room, and the rest of my family slept in their own rooms. I stayed up for a while on my phone, playing games. All of a sudden, I heard noises coming from outside. It sounded like a large dog panting. I don't know what got a hold of me, but I figured I would go see what it was from the window. What I saw gave me goosebumps. There were 2 glowing orange eyes. From my experience, it looked like a wolf's glowing eyes, from what I've seen in movies and documentaries. But the weird thing was, the eyes were about 7 or 8 feet off the ground, by far drastically different from the height of a normal wolf. I was horrified, so I quickly ducked down. After 5 minutes, I looked back and the creature, who knows what it was gone. I slowly walked back over to the couch, then hid under the covers until the sun came up. The following morning, me and my family were eating breakfast. I didn't bring up what I saw last night, because they wouldn't believe me or they would call me crazy. The next 2 days, nothing else happened. But something did happen on the 3rd day. Me and my older cousin decided to go walking in the woods. No one else wanted to come with us, so it's just the 2 of us. While we were walking, we were talking about video games and other things. When we stopped talking, we noticed the woods were dead silent. I stopped my cousin and he noticed that as well. After a few minutes, we heard the sound of a stick breaking under the weight of something's footstep, By instinct, we turned in the direction of the noise, and what we saw will forever haunt us. There stood a large wolf, covered in dark fur, yet it looked especially muscular, and its front paws looked like human hands. Then the wolf stood up on its hind legs, and it towered over me and my cousin. It snarled at us. We could see most of its horrid teeth. Oddly enough, while some of them were sharp, many of them looked like human teeth. My cousin and I ran for it back to the cabin, but we could hear that thing right behind us. It sounded like it was running on all fours. We didn't look back, in fear that doing so would slow us down. By some miracle, we made it back to the cabin, and only then did we turn around and find the wolf creature was gone. We ran inside and locked the door, our family surprised at the sudden and panicked entrance. They asked us what happened, and we told them everything. My sisters and my other cousins did not believe us. One of my aunts was shocked. My mother was frightened. My other aunt didn't believe us as well, but both my father and uncle believed us. My father warned the rest of my family to not go outside without an adult. It was getting late. We stayed up watching TV, a bit nervous. That's when all of us heard an ear-piercing howl, and now the rest of my family believed what me and my older cousin were talking about. What happened next terrified my entire family. We heard the front door being scratched by something. My father was about to go look through the window, but then we saw it. That wolf creature was at the window already. Its eyes were glowing or reflecting orange, and it was snarling at us. My father and my uncle both grabbed their rifles. They turned on the porch light and went outside to confront it. But by then, the wolf creature was gone. But it had left something in its wake. My family and I went outside to look, and we were dumbfounded. A multitude of dead animals were scattered all over the place, as well as bloody claw marks on the door. We went back inside and locked all the doors and windows. My father kept guard, in case it came back. The rest of us tried to sleep, still terrified. A few hours later, I was still awake. I felt my eyes drawn toward the window, and there I saw it, just peering in at me, staring. Soon after, it turned around and disappeared into the dark woods. Why was it observing us? I went back to bed, still scared, and I didn't get much sleep that night. In the morning, we ate breakfast, packed all our things, and headed home, and we never went back into those woods again. We're still terrified of those events. Nowadays, I believe that what my family encountered was a werewolf or a dogman. There have been sightings of this creature all over the world, and missing reports of people disappearing in the woods. I wonder if they're connected. I'm just glad my family and I did not become the werewolf or dogman's next victims. Who knows what could have happened if that thing had managed to find a way inside. Peace River Shadow Demons, from Osborne 007. I was on vacation with my sister and her husband in Florida. We were staying at the campground at Walt Disney World, but I grew tired of the crowds. So I headed south and eventually ended up in a town called Arcadia. Staying at a campground there, I decided after a day or two that I wanted to play some golf, so I went up to a local golf course near the Peace River Wilderness area. It was an easy course, and I was alone. The 18th hole had water on the right and an elevated green surrounded by sand traps. I gave the ball a good whack, being careful to hit a draw, avoiding the water. It landed right in the middle of the fairway. The green was pretty intimidating. The sand traps were deep and the green had a narrow passage. Taking out my 3-wood, I hit down on the ball as hard as I could, and off it went. It was heading straight for the rough, but I knew it would turn because I was so far in front of the ball. It turned out alright and actually turned over. It rolled right up the green and stopped 4 feet in front of the hole. I really wanted to make this putt, so I walked around the hole until I could see the perfect shot. I knew speed was going to be important. When I hit it, I immediately regretted hitting it too hard, but it bent to the right and went right in the center of the cup for a birdie. I was honestly elated. I remember thinking, dear Lord, if I died today, I'd die a happy man. But I would soon regret that thought. I heard a bird caw behind me, and in a bush on the edge of the green was a raven, sitting on a branch in the bush. As I was leaving, in a good mood, I looked at the raven and spoke to it. "Sorry, Mr. Raven, but I don't have any crackers." He looked at me with his head cocked to one side, peering at me with one eye. Then he gave me another couple of caws. He didn't budge as I walked past him. I told him, playfully, in the way of Lou Costello, to shut up. He flew off, which surprised me as he was so large I didn't think he could fly. As I walked around the bush and I looked, he was gone. There wasn't anywhere he could have gone, though. There was a field across the street, but he just disappeared. As I got into my pickup truck, a cold breeze hit me in the face. This was strange as it was 78 degrees out. When I got into my truck, the cab was cold too. The windows had been closed, so it should have been hot. I headed back towards town, thinking about stopping at Sonic, getting one of those big old cheeseburgers and tots with jalapenos and cheddar cheese. Along the way, I saw a sign that said Wilderness Road Boat Launch, and a voice in my head said, "Go down there." I pulled over for a minute, considering that the dirt road was pretty washboarded, but the voice in my head continued, "You're on vacation, explore a little bit." The road was long and bumpy. It led down deep into the woods, but I finally came to the boat launch. There was only one vehicle there with a boat trailer on it. I parked my truck and pulled out my fishing rod. After some time, I realized there wasn't much biting in this river. Peace River is a wilderness area used by canoers. It's very remote. I noticed a Tarzan swing, but decided it wasn't a good idea to use it since I was by myself. If something bad happened, I'd be alone. But the voice in my head said, "What are you, a coward?" I felt pressured to give it a try. It felt as if something was holding me back a little bit. As I let go, I tried to arch my body, but my hip hit a ledge. I was upside down in the water seeing stars, and my hip was screaming in pain. I didn't know which way was up, but being a scuba diver, I let out a little bit of air and followed the bubbles to the surface. Climbing up the bank was almost impossible. It was so steep. One of the steps was very high, and I realized my hip was broken. I tried pulling my way up, and I fell all the way back down, almost passing out from the pain. I realized that going down the river might be my best bet. I headed for the launch. There were several blowdowns, that is, trees that had fallen across the river, which wasn't very wide, and each time I crawled over one of these blowdowns, the pain would just take the energy right out of me, so I'd rest for a while. At one point, I saw a 10-foot gator on the shore. He seemed surprised, and as he jumped in the water, he slammed his mouth shut, squirting me right in the face with a bucket full of murky brown water. I remembered thinking, so that's what gators do to confuse their prey. But he just swam on by. He did hit me with his tail by accident. I rested for a while, considering my situation, and started to call for help. I then noticed that there were shadows moving along in the woods. I focused on them. They were darker than a moonless night, darker than outer space, darker than a room with no windows. I continued to crawl with my body floating in the water, my left hip totally immobilized. Looking back, I noticed the shadows were in fact following me. When I came to the next blowdown, I called out in a calm voice, "I can see you." And I swear one of those shadows stuck its head out from the crotch of a tree and then poured down the side of the tree like dirty motor oil. It pulled up on the ground and it began to head towards me like an army of black ants. They then rose up to form a shape that reminded me of the little guy on the men's room door sign. Like I said, this thing was jet black. It looked like somebody had taken a cookie cutter of a gingerbread man and cut a hole in our dimension. On the other side of that hole was absolutely nothing. It began to flash back and forth very quickly with traces behind it. The other two, there were 3 shadows altogether, were not quite as dark as the lead entity. They kind of stood back. I thought to myself, is this supposed to scare me? He immediately stopped and began to do a Bela Lugosi thing with his arm, walking back and forth. I actually laughed out loud. He stopped and walked right up to me. I turned away, and a little voice in my head said, "You know what to say." And I thought, I do? The little voice said to me, to say in the name of Jesus Christ, "Be gone. Hold your head up high and yell it." I did as the voice said, and all 3 of those shadows disappeared right away. I continued my painful journey towards the launch and finally reached it. Yelling towards the sky, I said, "Dear Lord, please send some help. Anybody." A boat then pulled up. I called out for help. A man approached from the boat. Oddly enough, he had a revolver in his hand, and he asked me a question first. "This ain't some DEA trick, is it?" "No, I busted my hip. I need some help, please," I replied. They got me the help I needed, and I didn't say anything about the poached gator in the back of their boat. I was just thankful to be out of that situation.